Hi everybody, and welcome to today's session. So my name is Emma Morrissey, and I'm really pleased to bring you this virtual session today. I want to keep it nice and simple, so I thought I'd just tell you a little bit more about what you can do with just the very simple HB pencil. Now usually when you get a set of graphite pencils or graded pencils, you'll have all sorts of different pencils with different lead names, and HB is the most common one. You might have some others such as B, H, 2B, 4B, 6B and so on. And further up the scale you go, so any pencils that are named sort of 2, 4, 6 and so on, those would be B pencils, which are very soft lead, so those are really good for shading. But your standard HB pencil is very versatile, you can do a lot with it, and I just wanted to give you a little demonstration of that today. As I said, this is the most common lead that you will find, so if ever you sort of just pick up a pencil, 9 times out of 10 it will be an HB one that is used. So when we are practicing sketching with an HB pencil, it's all about pressure. Pressure you apply and the marks you make with mark making, which you may have heard of. So I'll just do a little quick demonstration for you on that, and then I'm going to show you how to do a quick little sketch here. I'll make sure that you have the link to this image so that you can draw along with me. So one of the things you might want to just practice with is whereabouts you hold the pencil. So if you hold it quite far down here and just go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards like so, you can get quite a sort of dark, intense mark. If you hold it halfway up, you'll see you're not able to apply the same pressure, so it becomes much lighter. And if you hold it right at the end, again go backwards and forwards, again it will become lighter and lighter. Now this is a wonderful way of just practicing different tones, which is really handy when you're doing shading, and also different ways of just creating shading. So as I said, you can go backwards and forwards like this. You can do a cross hatch, which is where you then go the opposite way. You can also do sort of a circular motion as well. What this does is this starts to hide the white of the paper. Sometimes you might hear that being called paper tooth, and that basically just means the white of the paper, so that you probably won't want to see that coming through if you're doing a sketch. You'll want to try and hide that as much as possible so that it looks smooth. So with that being said, let's have a little go at this. As I said, I'll make sure that you have the link to the image. This is from a website called Pixabay, which is wonderful for getting royalty-free images. So with something like this, it's always worth just sort of looking at it for a while. This is all about your observational skills, and you want to just sort of work in a clockwise motion when you start to sketch this, and you want to be darting your gaze backwards and forwards between the reference image that you're looking at and the surface that you're working on. So I'm just going to start to put this in, and I'm just going to do it quite lightly, and you'll notice I'm not doing any sort of fine definite lines. I'm doing it in a very what I call sort of a sketchy way. I'm just going to start to put some of the detail in, and then I'll build it up as I go. So I'm darting my gaze backwards and forwards all the time. I said I'm going to build this up a bit at a time, noticing where some of the sort of shaded darker areas are. Just going to pop that there, maybe pop it over there so you don't have the shine on it. more you do this, the more you'll build your observational skills. So you can try and get things sort of in proportion, just so you've got a basic sketch. What we're going to do is, again, you'll see I'll be moving my hand up and down the pencil to get different tones in here. So I'm holding this quite far down here just to do some of the shaded areas here. And as I said, just dart your gaze backwards and forwards. It helps you with perspective, proportion, and just sort of have a think, and also hold the drawing that you're doing at arm's length every so often if you need to, because this will really help you to see, you know, is that tone right? Is it too dark? Is it too light? I'm just going to darken some of this area here. Sometimes it can also be really helpful just to put in some of the sort of overall tone, because of course you can always make it darker should you need to. Just keep building it up a little bit at a time. So as I said, a HB pencil is really very versatile. You can do a lot with it. And it's also just a great starting point just to really sort of learn some of the basic things you can do with it, and then once you've sort of mastered that and you've gotten confident with it, then you can start moving on to using a variety of different graded pencils. So I'm just going to start to make some of the areas a little bit darker now. Again, you'll notice I'm sort of moving my hand as well along the pencil just to get the different tones that I need, just to define some of the areas a little bit more. Just build it up, bit at a time. So we can see some areas here of sort of highlighted areas. Okay, I'm just going to hold this just so you can see a little bit clearer there. I'm just going to keep building this up, again darting my gaze backwards and forwards, just seeing if some of the areas need to be a little bit darker. As I said, you can always add more shading once you've got all of the sort of main sort of coverage, sort of a basic tone in there. Then you can start really looking at it in a bit more detail and think, you know, do I need to add more? And it's always good to do those sort of little practice test runs beforehand as well, as I said, and it's always good to do those several times so that you've sort of got that confidence each time you go to do a little bit of a sketch. And once you're happy, you can start to sort of do more of a permanent line around things a bit more. And also where we've got some of the areas that are highlighted here, what I've done today in this demonstration is I've just sort of left the area of the paper white, but if you wanted to, you could always use an eraser to pick out the highlights. So that's something which is also very important when you're doing sketching, is that an eraser is not just there to rub something out if you've made a mistake, it's also there to use as a highlighter. So when it comes to picking out sort of areas of brightness like this and putting sort of lighter areas back in if you need to. Just keep building it up, a bit at a time. As I said, if you've got an area that you want to make a little bit lighter, if you've got an eraser, again this can be sort of a larger eraser, but if you're doing quite a small sketch like this one, if you've got an eraser on the end of a pencil, that will work well too. So I'm just going to use this and do this in sort of a circular motion. A little tip with erasers is obviously have a look at the eraser first, see if it's sort of particularly dirty before you do anything, because then if you do start to erase something, you might leave a mark. So it's always good sometimes just to rub that onto the paper, just to take off any marks, just to make sure it's clean. And then you can sort of redefine. So what I've done is I've just taken that little line out. I'm just going to put this line back in a little bit so it looks a little bit more defined. Okay, like so. Again, I'm just going to very lightly, so again I'm holding this sort of halfway up the pencil now, as I mentioned earlier, because I don't want this to be too intense in terms of how the mark will come out. I'm going to use my eraser just to take a little bit more out of here. And then again, just as I said, have a little sort of time observing, just seeing if there's any areas that need to be a little bit darker, anything that needs changing. So I'm just going to extend that a little bit because that needs to be a little bit wider. But the more you practice and observe things, you will notice things will become much easier, and you'll get more confident with some of the marks you make. Something else which is one of my top tips that can actually be quite helpful, no matter whether you're doing sort of a still life observation or if you're doing portraiture, is if you actually draw the item upside down. Again, as I said, this works quite well for portraits as well, because what this does is this sort of takes some of the intimidation away of trying to create a particular shape, especially if you are drawing people or a pet, an animal. Sometimes when we look at something like that, we think, oh, that's really tricky, I don't know if I can do that. So of course that can be quite intimidating. So when you just turn it upside down, it just then becomes, it's just form, lines and shapes. And there's a little bit of science to it as well, where they say that it uses the left side of the brain as well, which for some people makes drawing a little bit simpler to get proportion right. So it's always worth noting if you want to try something different. Just turn it upside down and see how you get on with it. Okay, so I think I'm more or less nearly there now. Okay. Again, I'll just quickly go over some of the other sort of things that can be helpful, as I said, in terms of breaking things down, just to make things a little bit easier. And also, if you're using an eraser, make sure it's clean before you put it onto the surface, otherwise you can make a mark which sometimes won't rub out. That can be quite frustrating. And also just to think about whereabouts you're holding the pencil when you're doing a drawing. Obviously when we hold it here we can get a much more intense mark, and if I hold it here we'll get lighter and lighter and lighter, because obviously there's less pressure applied, so it will make the mark much lighter as you go along. And just experiment, try some different lines as well. And again, you can hold the pencil different places to help with that in terms of line. And also, as I mentioned, particularly if you're doing a basic sketch like this, try and avoid sort of doing basic sort of defined lines like that. Just do it in a sort of sketchy motion like that, and as I did for this one. So you're basically constantly lifting the pencil off of the page. Can sometimes also be known as sort of drawing in a feathering type way, where you're doing lots of little marks, also known in the Impressionism art movement, where it's a combination of lots of little individual marks. So it's the same when you're sketching. Sometimes doing little marks like that can be much easier than trying to do a defined line, because then of course if you've put the line in and then it's wrong, you've got to rub it out and do it again. So sometimes just doing little sketchy lines, you can build it up much easier. Okay, so I hope that you found this helpful, this virtual tutorial. As I said, this is just a standard HB pencil and you can do a lot with it. It's very versatile. So yeah, I hope that that has been helpful, and hopefully I will see you again soon for another session.